So, episode 3 dropped last night, and whilst it started off well, that ending. They really fumbled it, and boy, do I have some strong feelings about that. Let's start with the positive. That opening scene of Obi-Wan looking to Qui-Gon and the Force for guidance, with various voiceovers and that cross-cutting with Vader being, for lack of a better word, assembled, was great. For the most part, I think Disney-era Star Wars has been great in upping the awesomeness of Vader. He has a few moments in this episode that are pretty brutal and dark. I'm going to get into that a bit more later on because that's also where I have major issues with this episode. Leia's character though is much improved. She still has these annoying outbursts, but we're treated to a couple of emotional scenes between her and Kenobi.
The Force. What does it feel like?
Have you ever been afraid of the dark? How does it feel when you turn on the light?
I feel safe.
Yes, it feels like that.
These scenes add layers to her character without subtracting from what we know of her later on. She knows she's adopted and wants to know who her parents were, and that's a relatable experience for the story, and it answers the question if you were wondering if Leia knew she was adopted by the Organas or not. Question I never really pondered, but we've got it answered. And the treacherous truck driver was a nice touch. It was good to see that characters in this world are good with a dictatorship ruling the galaxy, as it brings a supposed order to things. And his outright betrayal was amusing. Guess it made it easier for Kenobi to use him as a meat shield later on in the episode. Talking of brutality, this show got an audible reaction from me when the stormtrooper gets shot and falls onto the laser gate, similar to Reva chopping off the lady's hand in the first episode. It's these flourishes of brutality that really get reaction out of me, considering we see a few stormtroopers get slashed by a lightsaber in the Jedi Temple and no real damage, no limbs flying off, nothing. It always feels very PG and distracting. Here, seeing that stormtrooper get sliced in half, it just makes the world feel a little bit more dangerous, and if I ever see a laser barrier, I'm definitely not trying to walk through it. Now, onto my issues. Specifically, the final third of the episode was an absolute mess. I'm really confused by Obi-Wan's motivations here. Was he trying to confront Vader? If so, why does he keep trying to run away? It's rather nonsensical and reeks of poor writing and direction. Especially because this act kind of turns Vader into a horror movie villain with some of its cliches. Yeah, that sounds great on paper, however, you have Obi-Wan running away from Vader and Vader just keeps appearing to cut him off, just like the trope of people in horror films just never being able to outrun the slow-plodding villain. It also sends Obi-Wan's stock way down as a character as it feels so off. And poor Obi-Wan.
Look how they massacred my boy.
I'm a huge Obi-Wan fan, and this show feels like such a disservice to his character. I would almost put it on par with the Last Jedi version of Luke, where it goes against what we believe this character is supposed to be. I think there's room for doubt in Obi-Wan after all he's seen and gone through, but the way he's stumbling through the show is a mess. Just to get that glorious confrontation with Vader, and if that is the glorious confrontation, then it's a severe letdown and damaging to both characters. Because Vader has Obi-Wan within grip, literally, and he decides to roast him, and that's straight up dark, but my understanding of how fire works must be outdated because Obi-Wan should be way more toasty. But apart from damage to his arm, he did rather bloody well. Anyway, Vader uses a force push to douse the flames and fling Obi-Wan away, for a newly introduced character to save the day by reigniting the flames, and they just stare as Obi-Wan is saved by the slowest robot you'll ever see. It's almost parody at this point, like, you waited all this time to capture Obi-Wan and you're just going to let him go? I've seen people theorize that Vader wants Obi-Wan to suffer, but let's be honest here, this is just straight up BS because we need Obi-Wan to survive and we've conjured a terrible way for him to get away. Speaking of getting away, despite having a massive head start, Leia is captured once again. What seemed to be a pretty straightforward tunnel culminates in Reva beating Leia to the pilot and capturing her. I don't even want to think the logistics here, but that's the problem with the show. They want things to happen, so they just fudge their way through it. Another thing I want to point out is that the show has a really weird, cheap feeling to it. Mainly in production and set design, which is odd considering Star Wars usually has some of the best sets. On Mustafar, Vader's room just feels all strange. The interior has a cool blue marble look to it, but but it's got this wild orange contrast in the center line. I couldn't put my finger on it, but this episode is plagued with this cheap feel. It could be the way the show is being lit. Vader and Mustafar should have a darker feel to it, but it's just so bright. You're on a planet that's basically a volcano, and a pathetic fallacy for Vader's feelings. And we have this cool blue marble look going on. Give me some atmosphere and mood. Compare that to the water planet with the Imperial base, which has plenty of atmosphere to it. It's a moody feeling location. That's more in line to where I would imagine Vader to be than this Mustafar base, the interior. The exterior looks great, but the inside shot? No. Then we have the planet with Obi-Wan and Leia, which just feels like they're walking in some random Californian field. There's no character to it at all. Obviously in the wide you get some nice backgrounds painted in, but really a lot of times it doesn't feel far off a really well made fan film. Then there's this weird checkpoint that our heroes have to get across, but because we've seen an aerial view of the scene, you just think, oh, okay, Obi-Wan can just walk around it. Instead of wasting valuable time fumbling with the locking mechanism, maybe he's trying to deactivate it to drive the transport through. Heck, I'd be fine with that. But because he just waters on through without the truck, it just cracks me up, and that's one of the big problems so far for this episode, is that it does things that doesn't visually make sense from an audience perspective. Characters have these easily cleared obstacles that confound them. It just doesn't feel like anything matters. It's just a cheap thrill and moments that they sprinkle throughout, and when you think about them, you just think, oh, it's a bit strange, it doesn't quite make sense, but it was cool. No.
They lost him. He had help where to sweep the planet.
Now we'll never find him. Anyway, that's episode 3. I'll be honest, my optimism for each episode wanes as each one goes by. I think it's hampered by all sorts of problems in terms of direction and writing for the most part. We have Leia captured again, so Obi-Wan's going to have to save her. Again. And Obi-Wan's probably going to have to fight Vader. Again. There's a lot of repetition for a 6-episode season, considering a lot of these story beats feel reminiscent of The Mandalorian Season 1, saving a child and trying to find their family, get away from the Empire. It just feels tiring that we've gone on this journey with all these mad moments for fan service that don't make sense and, in my opinion, harm the greater story. That scene on the Death Star in A New Hope just feels more shallow now, because to me that was always the first time Vader and Obi-Wan met again after Mustafar, and you could just feel it bubbling.
I've been waiting for you, Obi-Wan. We meet again at last. The circle is now complete. When I left you, I was but the learner. Now I am the master. You should not have come back.
And that made way more sense for me, but now it just feels like, okay, we'll see what happens in the next 3.